Good morning to all of you. What a pleasure it is to start this second day of the student conference, and what a pleasure it is to sit with all of you. I really think it's so exciting to be in all of your presence and to learn and listen to all of you. There's nothing more exciting than knowing you're in a group of people who joined an experimental college. I don't know, I just think you're some of the bravest people I've ever met. In a couple of days, a lot of us are going to receive our master's degrees in the humanities. Last year, a lot of you received those. And then, of course, we have some faculty in here as well that have all the right credentials they need to be our professors. And all this to say that all of us, to some extent, have begun the intellectual path. And I don't say this to sound pretentious or anything, but just to say that we've read our Homer and our Dante and our Plato and Plotinus and Aristotle. And we've started this intellectual path. And my whole pitch today is that that comes with a duty and a responsibility. Starting the intellectual path, being a part of the intellectual life. But before I get to the crux of my argument, I just want to tell two brief stories from my life that are going to be relevant to the discussion today. The first one happened 5 years ago. I was a Christian missionary up in Canada, and the job of a missionary is actually quite simple. You're supposed to serve and to talk to any person that you see ever at all. So just before this photo was taken, I just finished up my 6-hour shift at the local Habitat for Humanity, where we were supposed to be doing service, but really we were just sort of therapists to addicts mostly. And just right after this photo was taken, I saw a very nice, neighborly looking, somewhat scantily dressed woman on the street. And I thought, let's do it, let's talk to her. So I struck up a conversation with this woman, and it was going amazing. I was telling her that she was a daughter of God, and telling her that Jesus loved her, and she was nodding in agreement. Like, it could not have been a better conversation. When suddenly a very sleek, shiny, brand new looking car pulled up right next to us, and a middle-aged man rolled down the window and exchanged a few words with the woman, after which she got in the car and it sped off into the sunset. And I stood there for a long time looking after the car, my mouth open, my hands hanging limply at my sides, because somewhere in my befuddled brain I realized that the woman had not been a nice neighborly woman out for a leisurely stroll, but a prostitute, waiting to get picked up for the night. And at that point in my life, I'd never thought I would have an experience like that. And so I just kind of chuckled to myself and went right home and right to bed. And yeah, it was like a very extreme example, which brings me to my next story, which happened only 5 months ago, and a lot of you were there for it. This is me outside the Metropolitan Opera Hall in New York City. We were there, Ralston cohort, to see Wagner's Tannhäuser live in December at the Metropolitan Opera Club. As you can see, I'm decked out for the occasion, got a massive dress on, and right after this, I even put on the long white gloves, had a string of pearls. And we went into the opera for 7 hours. And while we were in there for the opera, we ate the finest cheeses and wines and champagnes. They even had chocolate coins that were stamped with the words Metropolitan Opera Club. But as I went into the opera and sat down for the second act of the opera, I sat down next to two gentlemen who were clearly regular opera goers, and they actually tisked this sound. They tisked because the opera had the audacity to have open seats at Wagner's Tannhäuser on a Tuesday night. And this experience sticks out in my mind as well for the same reason, because I never thought that I would be having an experience like that. So obviously these experiences are, these two stories, sort of the highest of high culture and the lowest of low culture. But the thing that's sort of inspiring to me about it is that I actually enjoyed both experiences and I learned from both. And that's what I'm kind of advocating for today. We're going to talk a little bit about extremes and the diversity that we have in culture. And what I'm arguing for today, that somehow intellectuals have the responsibility to reside somewhere in the middle. So we're going to get into it. In 1927, Julien Benda, a French essayist, published this book, which was translated into English as The Treason of the Intellectuals. And the book goes into a lot of different points, but he outlines the role of the intellectuals, saying, "They are all those whose activity essentially is not the pursuit of practical aims, all those who seek their joy in the practice of an art or a science or a metaphysical speculation, in short, in the possession of non-material advantages." He outlines what the role of an intellectual is, and that is to seek truth and to uphold universal principles and to share them with the world. And the book is called The Treason of the Intellectuals, which means that you can abandon your role as an intellectual. And he thinks, Julien Benda thinks, that to abandon your role as an intellectual means that you fail to uphold your responsibility and instead succumb to the temptations of political and ideological manipulation. So what Julien Benda points out to us is that intellectuals have a role in society to uphold truth and universal principles and to share those with the world. You can also abandon that role and that responsibility. And so Today, I want to talk more about this responsibility and specifically about the divisions that exist that we are supposed to merge. The first one being education. So, in 1903, there was an epic debate in the United States, a debate that I think we should talk about way more often because this debate actually never ended. It's one that is alive and well in our culture today. The debate was between Booker T. Washington on the left and then W.E. Burghardt Du Bois on the right. And this is in the aftermath of the Civil War, and it's about the state of education, mechanical arts versus liberal arts. Sound familiar? This was a debate specifically about the state of Black education in America, but is relevant to all races today. And so this is right after slavery has ended in the United States, and Booker T. Washington argues that slaves were in possession of nearly all the mechanical arts at the end of the Civil War. They knew how to build houses and how to farm. They knew how to make shoes. They were carpenters. They knew how to make clothes. And he's worried about them losing that in favor of learning Latin and Greek. And so we're going to kind of get into this debate. Booker T. Washington is the start. He's on team mechanical arts, and he makes some really fantastic points. He says, working means civilization. All forms of labor are honorable, and all forms of idleness disgraceful. All races that have gotten upon their feet have done so largely by laying an economic foundation and in general by beginning in a proper cultivation and ownership of the soil. Yes, he's our labor guy. He's our work guy. We love that. He says, some years ago when we decided to make tailoring a part of our training at the Tuskegee Institute, that's the college he founded, I was amazed to find that it was almost impossible to find in the whole country an educated colored man who could teach the making of clothing. We could find numbers of them who could teach astronomy, theology, Latin, or grammar, but almost none who could instruct in the making of clothing, something that has to be used by every one of us every day in the year. How often have I found women who could converse intelligently upon abstruse subjects, and yet could not tell how to improve the condition of the poorly cooked and still more poorly served bread and the meat which they and their families were eating 3 times a day. It is discouraging to find a girl who can tell you the geographical location of any country on the globe and who does not know where to place the dishes upon a common dinner table. It is discouraging to find a woman who knows much about theoretical chemistry and who cannot properly wash and iron a shirt. Good point. These are great points that Booker is making. He continues saying, the teaching of history, for example, is all very well, but nobody can really know anything of history unless he has been taught to see things grow, has so seen things not only with the outward eye, but with the eyes of his intelligence and conscience. I plead for industrial education and development for man, not because I want to cramp him, but because I want to free him. By the side of industrial training should always go mental and moral training, but the pushing of mere abstract knowledge into the head means little. We want more than the mere performance of mental gymnastics. Our knowledge must be harnessed to the things of real life. This is a very compelling argument. Get out in the real world, get your hands dirty, learn how to fix cars, make dinner, do things that are useful. I know we're really against that sometimes, but learn how to do things that are useful. But never fear, our friend is going to back up the Ralston memo, our liberal arts guy, and he makes a few good points as well. He says, if we make money the object of man training, we shall develop money makers, but not necessarily men. If we make technical skill the object of education, we may possess artisans, but not in nature men. Was there ever a nation on God's fair earth civilized from the bottom upward? Never. It is, ever was, and ever will be from the top downward that culture filters. The talented tenth rises and pulls all that are worth the saving up to their vantage ground. This is the history of human progress. The best and most capable of their youth must be schooled in the colleges and universities of the land. A university is a human invention for the transmission of knowledge and culture from generation to generation through the training of quick minds and pure hearts. And for this work, no other human invention will suffice, not even trade and industrial schools. And then he continues by saying, all men cannot go to college, but some men must. I insist that the object of all true education is not to make men carpenters, it is to make carpenters men. Whether you like it or not, the millions are here, and here they will remain. If you do not lift them up, they will pull you down. Education and work are the levers to uplift a people. Work alone will not do it unless inspired by the right ideals and guided by intelligence. Education must not simply teach work, it must teach life. So this is an epic debate that happens in 1903. You might recognize a lot of the arguments today. It's a debate that we still have because we are divided on what the purpose of education is today, strongly divided. My friends at law and business school right now never hesitate to tell me how stupid it is that I am studying the humanities and how it's not useful enough. And I never hesitate to tell them that they should probably try reading a book one of these days. It's a battle, it's a war. And this is one of the divisions that I think intellectuals need to work a little bit harder to bridge, because if we really believe that we are the defenders of truth and that that's something that we need to share with everyone, means we might need to hop over to the mechanical arts world every once in a while, leave the books, get our hands dirty, and try and convince these people to pick up a few pages of Homer. The next division I want to talk about is a cultural division, specifically cultural literacy. This is Michael DeSapio, and he wrote an article on August 17th in 2020 called "What Does It Mean to Be a Person of Culture?" And he's going to make some fantastically compelling points. I love what he says here. To be cultured is to acquaint oneself with a range of specific works, to have read among the great books, developed an ear for fine music, or trained the eye to see the beauty in great art and architecture are all phases of culture. When dipped into repeatedly, these products of culture build up our souls, become a part of our consciousness, and mold our tastes and sentiments. Yet to be a person of true culture is to raise oneself above the commercialism, the faddishness and the cult of celebrity that the culture machine thrives on. The true person of culture will also reject the superficial notion of culture as social status symbol or snobbish fashion accessory. Needless to say, forms of entertainment that are chiefly about making money and that appeal to the baser parts of our nature are not culture in the true sense. Culture is like a garden, which one faithfully tends, discerning and selecting what to include, carefully planting, watering, and nurturing the seeds, slowly bringing to fruition. His idea of cultural literacy is that we are picking and choosing carefully. We're being discerning about the kind of culture that we involve ourselves in, and that some things are cultural and some things are not. But I told you today we're talking about divisions, so we have someone on the other side of this argument as well. And that happens to be Charles Murray, who wrote this book in 2012 called Coming Apart, a book surprisingly not about America's political problems, but cultural. He writes about a new kind of segregation where people are likely to have different preferences in books, movies, different ways of spending their free time, different friends, and differences in a dozen other aspects of life simply based on where they grew up and how they've lived their lives. His book can be summed up in this quote here: "The danger increases that the people who have so much influence on the course of the nation have little direct experience with the lives of ordinary Americans and make their judgments about what's good for other people based on their own highly atypical lives." So Charles Murray's argument is that the high class in society, be that the intelligentsia or the political class, live in highly atypical lives. They have forgotten what it's like to be the life of a normal, everyday American. It's a cultural divide because they do not have shared experiences anymore. And he's worried about this. And it actually doesn't have that much to do with how many books you read or what kind of architecture you like. It's much simpler than that. So Charles Murray designs a quiz, and he calls it, "How Thick Is Your Bubble?" And he asks a couple of questions on this quiz. The higher you score on this test, the thinner your bubble, and the more likely you are to relate to a wide variety of normal Americans. Here are some of the questions the test asks. Have you ever lived for at least a year in an American neighborhood in which the majority of your 50 nearest neighbors did not have college degrees? Have you ever walked on a factory floor? Have you ever held a job that caused something to hurt at the end of the day? Have you ever had a close friend who was an evangelical Christian? Have you ever had a close friend who could seldom get better than C's in high school, even if he or she tried hard? Have you ever purchased Avon products? It's a little outdated. I think this quiz is quite outdated. I don't even know what that is. During the last month, have you voluntarily hung out with people who were smoking cigarettes? And then this one, have you ever done either of these for a trip of 50 miles or more? Ridden on a long distance bus or hitchhiked? There's more questions on the quiz, asking how many times you've eaten at certain restaurants such as Applebee's, Denny's, Chili's, or Outback Steakhouse, or others that ask how many TV shows you watch regularly: American Idol, Grey's Anatomy, Desperate Housewives, or Survivor. It might seem simple. If you grew up rich, you have a thick bubble. If you grew up middle class, you have a thinner bubble. But something the test points out is that you can be a non-elite American and still live in a very thick bubble. If you're wondering what the test score is of a homeschooler raised in Utah, I will tell you it is not very high. Most of us have spent the last few years reading all kinds of books. We are smart, intelligent, and willing to learn, but according to Murray's test, that doesn't necessarily mean you can relate to a wide variety of people. You might know your pre-calculus, ancient Greek, the wars of the 20th century, and the Iliad, but that doesn't mean you're cultured, according to Murray's test. It doesn't mean you've had a job that exhausted you at the end of the day, that you've interacted with ex-cons and addicts, that you've seen a third world country, or that you know the lyrics to at least 3 Taylor Swift songs. Murray points out that sometimes being educated can thicken your bubble, leading you straight into a highly atypical lifestyle that is far from the life of an average American. So, according to both Sapio and Murray, intellectuals need to educate themselves and cultivate the truth and beauty that comes from the ancient texts. But they must also put in some effort to have shared experiences with normal, everyday people, even if it seems like a waste of time. This will require you to do things that are uncomfortable or stupid, things that are not super useful to you personally. It might require you to play a little bit of Minecraft so you can have a conversation with 10 to 20-year-old boys, or eat a Taco Bell even if it grosses you out so you can understand the diet habits of a 19-year-old college student. Or heaven forbid, it might require you to read the Harry Potter series so you know what people mean when they say they're waiting for their letter to Hogwarts. If we really believe the mantra of this year that it's all in Homer, then that means that somehow, some way, everyone needs to be able to access Homer. That duty falls on us, the intellectuals, the people who studied Homer for a year. It will require effort to bridge the divide in education and to become culturally literate enough to talk to literally anyone, and enthusiasm about the things we study. It will require simplifying our language when we talk about concepts like the forms, or necessity, or Geist, and communicating the passion and excitement that these ideas deserve. My last story I'll share comes from my first philosophy class of my undergraduate degree. I commented in that class about a perhaps somewhat well-known philosopher called Socrates. Not a single muscle moved on my wonderful professor's face as he gently, lovingly suggested to me that it was pronounced Socrates. In that moment, I saw a real intellectual, someone who was a guardian of the truths of the past, and someone who knew both his subject and his students. Someone who understood his duty to share with enthusiasm the subject he loved so much. Someone who had considered the possibility that not everyone knew as much as he did. I'd just like to close with the words of Rudyard Kipling from this famous poem. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And which is more, you'll be a man, my son. Thank you.